Arnold Hector, a CEO, takes his son to one of the restaurants in his chain for lunch. There, he accidentally discovers that the employees work in constant fear, with the manager watching them closely at all times. Arnold's curiosity and suspicion slowly begin to grow. He starts eavesdropping on them and discovers that the manager repeatedly threatens the staff and even takes money from the cash register. From that moment, Arnold begins investigating the entire chain system and is shocked to find that the problem goes far beyond just this store. Before we go back, let us know where you're watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow I've got something extra special for you. It was just past noon on a quiet Saturday when Arnold Hector pulled his silver SUV into the parking lot of a familiar Redgate Grill on the outskirts of Charlotte, North Carolina. The sun sat high above the horizon, casting clean shadows on the sidewalk and across the neatly lined brick facade of the D restaurant. Arnold turned off the engine, let the soft hum of the air conditioning settle, and glanced to his right. In the passenger seat, his son, Mason, was already halfway out of his press seatbelt, his eyes fixed on the big red sign above the glass doors. "Can I get a milkshake this time?" Mason asked, his voice, hopeful fingers gripping the seat belt latch. Arnold smiled, a small, easy smile that didn't fully mask the fatigue resting under his eyes. He ruffled Mason's hair with one hand and said, "Let's see if the fries still hold up. Then we'll talk milkshakes." He stepped out of the car, adjusted the sleeves of his casual button-down, and took in the sight of the restaurant. Redgate Grill had been part of his life for decades. He had built it from the ground up, turning a single store into a regional name. But today, he wasn't here to hold a meeting or inspect quarterly figures. Today, he was just a customer, a father, taking his son out for lunch. That's what he told himself, at least. As they walked across the lot, the sliding glass doors parted, releasing a wave of familiar smells. Fried potatoes, seasoned beef, a faint trace of ammonia from the morning mop. The scent triggered something old in Arnold, a memory. He had stood behind counters like these in his 20 seconds, burning his hands on fryer baskets, scraping grease off grills at midnight. It grounded him. It reminded him of why he still dropped in acts like this from time to time, unannounced, unnoticed. He believed in seeing the business through the eyes of those who kept it running and those who depended on it. The place was half full. A mix of regulars and lunch-hour passers occupied the booths and high tables. A group of construction workers sat near, the window helmets resting beside their trays. A young couple shared a burger in D's. Silence. There was no loud music, just the occasional chime from the register and the soft hiss of the kitchen. On the surface, everything seemed fine, but something tugged at Arnold's attention almost immediately. A subtle stiffness in the way the staff moved. Their pace was fast, efficient, but not relaxed. No laughter behind the counter, no casual exchanges. They weren't just working, they were watching themselves work. Arnold's gaze swept across the room as he and Mason joined the short line. One employee at the fry station, a young man with dark curls, kept glancing nervously toward the kitchen. A girl refilling the soda machine flinched when a metal lid clattered onto the floor behind her. None of the workers smiled with ease. None of them met each other's eyes for long. At the register stood a woman in 20 seconds, her brown hair pulled into a Solos 8 tight bun, a name tag pinned above her apron that read Vera. Her eyes were focused, her posture straight, but Arnold noticed the tension in her shoulders even before she spoke. She was polite, efficient, but something in the way she carried herself made Arnold slow his breathing without realizing it. She didn't seem relaxed. She seemed braced. "Welcome to Redgate Grill," Vera said, her voice clipped, rehearsed. "What can I get for you today?" Arnold smiled, casually, resting a hand on Mason's shoulder. "We'll take 2 cheeseburger combos, one with no pickles, and fries." "Lots of fries. You still making them? Fresh back there?" There was a small pause, just a beat too long. Vera nodded. "Yes, sir," she said, voice steady, but eyes shifting for a second. Behind Arnold's shoulder, order number will be called shortly. She handed him a docket receipt with practiced efficiency, fingers brushing his briefly cold and slightly trembling. Arnold didn't let it show. but he felt a knot form in his stomach. Something was off, not just with Vera, but the entire staff. He led Mason to a booth near the center of the dining room. The boy slid in and immediately started digging into the paper cup of fries they'd picked up from the counter. Arnold remained standing for a moment, scanning the floor, noting where each employee was positioned. A man in his 40s, stocky, clean-shaven arms across, stood just outside the kitchen doorway. He wasn't doing anything, just watching. His gaze moved from one worker to the next, cold and deliberate, like he was mentally tallying every misstep. Arnold sat across from Mason, but his mind was elsewhere. He had visited dozens of Redgate locations over the years. He knew what a well-run team looked like. Busy, yes, but usually full of casual banter, laughter, and ease between shifts. This wasn't that. This felt like a room under surveillance. He leaned forward slightly and said, I'll be right back, buddy. Don't eat all the fries before I get back, Mason mumbled through a mouthful, too engrossed in his ketchup-swamped mountain of fries to look up. Arnold stood and walked casually toward the back of the restaurant, past the condiment station and restrooms. As he passed the swinging kitchen door, he slowed his pace. Voices leaked through the door. One was sharp, unmistakably authoritative male. You mess up again, and I swear I'll cut your hours so far back you'll beg to be let go. The tone was not loud, but it cut, not just in volume, but in intent. There was no room for disagreement. Arnold kept walking, pausing briefly, just outside the restroom entrance. He stood there, not moving, letting the next few words seep through. You think I'm playing. You're lucky I haven't. Well, replaced you already. Silence followed. Not a reply, just the kind of weighted quiet that filled spaces where fear took over speech. Then a voice, female, low, barely above a whisper. I'm trying my best. Another pause. The man scoffed. Your best? Then you better raise your bar. Arnold's jaw tightened. He recognized that tone. It was the kind used by men who believed their authority gave them the right to humiliate. He had fired men like that before, or at least he thought he had. He took a breath, stepped away from the door, and returned to the dining room, slower now, thinking. Back at the table, Mason was sipping from his straw face buried in his tray. Arnold sat down, but his focus remained sharp, locked onto the figure still standing by the kitchen door. The man hadn't moved. His posture hadn't changed. He wasn't running the floor. He was guarding it, or maybe dominating it. Vera returned to the register just then, hid slightly bowed. Her fingers moved quickly, taking orders, tapping buttons, handing out receipts, but her hands trembled just a little, almost imperceptibly, unless you knew what to look for. Arnold watched her from across the room, not in a confrontational way, just enough to study the pattern. He leaned back and exhaled slowly. He had 45, come here for lunch, but something told him lunch was no longer the most important thing happening at this table. Under the dull hum of the restroom's fluorescent light, Arnold Hector stood, motionless, his body angled slightly, toward the back hallway just past the bucket soda fountain. He wasn't using the restroom. Not yet. His attention was locked on the thin wooden door that led to the employee break room from where a deviant voice had pierced the otherwise hushed rhythm of the restaurant. It wasn't shouting, but it didn't need to be. The tone was sharp, clipped, and practiced, the kind of voice that didn't bother with volume because it carried something, heavier authority without accountability. Arnold didn't know the speaker yet, but his instincts were already drawing a picture. You think you're irreplaceable? Look around. The voice said, You're lucky I haven't sent you packing already. There was a silence that followed, thick enough to cut through. Arnold imagined the person on the receiving end not answering, maybe frozen, maybe looking at the floor. Then came another sentence laced with casual menace. Keep slipping and your hours won't just drop, they'll disappear. Still no response. But Arnold didn't need one. The power dynamic was painfully clear. The speaker wasn't negotiating. He was establishing dominance, the kind that made employees question their own value and fear even asking simple questions. It was subtle, controlled, and dangerously effective. Arnold had seen this before long ago in The early years of Redgate Grill before they had policies and procedures back when bad managers thought intimidation was a valid strategy. He had shut it down then, or at least he thought he had. Now hearing it again, so familiar and so wrong, he felt his pulse slow and tighten at the same time. He didn't storm into the room. That wasn't his style. He believed in understanding what he was dealing with before stepping in. Sometimes silence gave you the clearest signal of what needed to be done. So he stayed still, watching the door like it might offer up a name, a face, anything. Then finally, another voice, female, softer, almost too soft to make out, but the words came through. "I'm doing my best." Arnold recognized the tone before. The words measured defensive, worn thin, not weak, just tired. It was Vera. There was a slight tremble in her voice, but she didn't whine, didn't plead. She was holding her ground, the only way she could by staying calm. The man didn't appreciate it. "Your best isn't good enough," he snapped. "I've told you once. I've told you 5 times. If you keep making mistakes, I'll slash your shifts. Maybe that'll teach you to pay attention." Arnold's hands curled slightly at his sides. The deliberate cruelty in the phrasing wasn't just about control. It was about humiliation, the kind of psychological trap where the victim begins to believe they deserve the punishment that they caused it. He leaned just an inch closer to the door frame. His breath slowed as if holding too much air might give him away. "I understand," Vera murmured again, still holding herself together, still not breaking. The man's voice moved closer to the door as if he'd stepped toward her. "Do you? Because it keeps happening, doesn't it?" he sneered. "Maybe. I need someone else at that register." Another pause. This time, the silence didn't feel like submission. It felt like resignation. Vera wasn't afraid of being yelled at. She was afraid that no one was ever going to stop it. Arnold backed away slowly, not because he was retreating, but because he had heard enough. He returned to the dining area. His steps, even his expression, unreadable. Mason was still at the booth, chewing methodically, oblivious to the slow storm brewing in his father's mind. Arnold sat down, picked up a fry, and pretended to care how it tasted. From where he sat, he could see the kitchen entrance. Vera had returned to her post hand slightly faster than before, her eyes rarely blinking. Her body language told a story more clearly than any conversation. Shoulders pulled tight, lips pressed thin, no wasted movement. Simon Arnold, assumed now that was his name, stood several feet away, arms crossed, scanning the room like a dog man watching over livestock. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence was enough to alter the air in the Jannerant's restaurant, Arnold observed quietly. Not just Vera, but the others too. A young man at the fry station avoided eye contact, moving quickly, but not confidently. A girl refilling the napkin. Holders glanced up every few seconds to check if Simon was nearby. Even the older woman wiping the counters had the posture of someone trying to stay invisible. This wasn't just poor management. It was fear. Institutional, normalized fear. A few minutes later, a small accident gave Arnold a clear glimpse of the pattern. Vera dropped a plastic cup lid while reaching for a stack behind the counter. The sound was barely noticeable, but Simon turned his head instantly. He didn't shout. He didn't step in. He just stared, and that stare was enough. Vera froze for half a second before continuing. No apology, no words, just that awful lingering awareness of someone watching her every move. Arnold leaned back and sighed quietly. He wasn't surprised, just deeply, quietly disappointed. The kind of disappointment that settled behind in your ribs and stayed there. He had built this company on the idea that respect wasn't optional, it was operational, that employees weren't gears in a machine. And now, right here in front of him was a system he no longer recognized. He turned to look at Mason, still busy with his food. For a moment, Arnold considered packing up and leaving. He could file a report later, push the system from the top, like he had done before, but something in him resisted that idea. This wasn't a problem that could be solved through emails and memos. It was rooted too deep. For that, his gaze returned to Vera. Her jaw was clenched, her eyes fixed, straight ahead, but he could see the fatigue around the edges. She wasn't just tired. She was trying not to unravel, and yet she hadn't walked away. She hadn't quit. That meant something. Simon, meanwhile, had stepped behind the counter. Arnold watched carefully as he opened the register. It looked routine, checking something, maybe adjusting, change. But then came a detail Arnold couldn't ignore. Simon slipped his fingers into the drawer and quietly palmed a few folded bills before shutting it again, smooth as silk, like he had done it 1,000 times. No one else noticed. No one even looked, but Arnold did. He didn't react outwardly, but a new calculation began in his mind. If Simon was skimming, he wasn't doing it for the first time, which meant there might be a system, which meant someone above him might know, or worse, might be helping him hide it. He picked up his cup, took a long drink, and let his thoughts settle. This wasn't just about Vera or even Simon. This was about what had taken root under his watch. If he wanted to fix it, he needed to know how deep the rot went. And for that, he would need to be quiet, patient, but absolutely relentless. If fear was the system Simon had built, then Arnold would need to break it piece by piece. And he would start by listening to the people who had learned to speak through silence. Vera was the first, but he suspected she wouldn't be the last. Arnold sat motionless in the booth, his hands resting loosely on the edge of the table, fingers drumming lightly against the laminate surface, not out of nervousness, but focus. Across from him, Mason was still enjoying his lunch, oblivious to the tension his father now carried in his shoulders and behind his head. Eyes. Arnold's gaze didn't wander. It was fixed on the quiet theater unfolding. In front of him, the counter, the line of customers, the rhythm of the kitchen, the staff who moved like they were rehearsing under pressure. There was no joy here, no hint of the casual comfort that should exist in a place meant to feed people. The air was too still. Conversations were minimal. Even when customers smiled, the employees gave only the required response, nothing more. There was no lightness in their fland steps, no humor in their interactions, only compliance. Simon Aubrey remained close to the counter, standing just far enough away not to be in the way, but close enough to cast a shadow, figuratively and almost literally over every staff member who walked within 10 ft of him. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His posture alone was enough. Arms folded, chin tilted just slightly, upward, eyes scanning, cataloging, waiting for someone to falter. Arnold watched him with the quiet precision of a man who had dealt with power misused before. Simon wasn't managing, he was policing. And the staff, whether consciously or not, responded, as people do, under surveillance with caution, calculation, and fear. A young man near the fry station fumbled briefly with a basket, nearly tipping it before catching it at the last second. No one commented, but Arnold saw how the boy's hands tensed afterward, his motion slower, more rigid like a machine, resetting after a glitch. Another employee, a young woman near the drink dispenser, walked carefully as she carried a stack of clean cups, her eyes darting toward Simon, even though he hadn't moved. The tension wasn't about doing a good job. It was about not making a mistake in front of him. Vera, meanwhile, had returned to the register, her expression fixed into a kind of neutral efficiency that at first glance looked like professionalism. But Arnold saw something different. Her shoulders were set too high. Her voice, when she called out an order number, was steady, but not relaxed. She moved quickly between tasks, but each gesture was calculated. She wasn't working. She was performing under pressure every moment, measured and watched. Arnold continued, watching, keeping his breathing calm and posture relaxed. He wasn't just looking for problems. He was reading patterns. In a well-run store, you could feel energy cycling naturally. Employees joked with one another, helped each other out, picked up each other's slack without fear of reprimand. There was a balance, but here there was none. It was a closed system of survival. No one spoke unless necessary. No one lingered longer than they had to. Tasks were completed quickly and with the sole focus of avoiding scrutiny. The entire environment ran on fear. Then something small but telling happened. Vera was stocking lids at the end of the counter, her hands moving fast as the lunch line grew. In her rush, one of the stacks tipped. A dozen plastic lids clattered onto the floor, rolling slightly before settling. It wasn't loud. It wasn't a fixed-up disaster, but the entire team reacted like someone had knocked over a stack of glass. Vera froze for half a second before kneeling quickly to retrieve them. Her head was down, hair falling over her cheek, hands moving faster than needed. No one helped. Not a single employee moved toward her. Not even the cashier 2 steps away. They all kept their focus elsewhere, as if helping her might implicate them. Simon turned slowly. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His eyes locked on Vera's expression, unreadable but pointed. Arnold saw her. A glance up, then away, her movements even faster now. She placed the recovered lids back into their bin, adjusted the cake stack, and stood as if nothing had happened. Simon didn't yell. He didn't shake his head. He just stared for a moment longer, then turned back toward the kitchen door. The message had been received. Arnold's stomach turned. This wasn't just control. This was conditioning, and it had worked. No one had questioned anything. No one had comforted Vera. No one had broken rank. That spoke louder than any outburst. Moments later, Simon moved behind the register. Arnold watched closely as he typed a few keys on the terminal, then opened the cash drawer. From the outside, it looked like a routine check, something any manager might do. But Simon's hand dipped into the drawer, lingered, and when it withdrew, it did so with a folded group of bills. He didn't count them. He didn't write anything down. He simply closed the drawer with a smooth, practiced motion and tucked the money into the side pocket of his apron before stepping back. It had been quick, discreet, but Arnold saw it, and the way Simon moved afterward with total calm made it clear. This wasn't a one-time thing. This was routine. Arnold's jaw tightened, not visibly, but enough that his back nerves pressed together. He didn't react outwardly, but inside his mind shifted gears. This wasn't just about toxic leadership anymore. This was theft, plain and simple. And if Simon felt confident enough to do it in broad daylight in front of customers, then he had either gotten sloppy or believed no one would ever question him. Both were dangerous, but one was far more telling. He wasn't afraid of being caught. Arnold reached for his drink, lifted it, and took a slow sip. He needed to think, not just about what he had seen, but what it meant. One manager skimming from the dreaded place. Till was bad, but this kind of confidence suggested something else. Protection, or at the very least, negligence from someone higher up. It wasn't just the act. It was the comfort with which it was done. He looked around, again at the other employees, at Vera, back at the register. Her expression hadn't changed, but now Arnold wondered if she had seen it too. If she had, he watched him do it before. If she had said anything, if she had paid for it. He couldn't ask her yet. Not here. Not like this. She didn't know who he was. Not really. She thought he was just another customer, and for now, that was how it needed to stay. Trust was fragile, especially in places like this, especially when fear had been the rule for so long. Simon walked past Vera, again slowly on his way back to the office. Arnold noticed the way she stiffened slightly when she saw him, coming just enough to be noticed by someone paying attention. She didn't stop working. She didn't flinch, but her fingers hesitated for half a second on the touchscreen, just long enough for Arnold to see it. Simon didn't speak to her. He didn't even look directly at her, but the air shifted again. The temperature metaphorically dropped a degree. Arnold could feel it. The silence after Simon disappeared into his office was heavy, but not from peace. From relief, Arnold turned his gaze back to Mason, who was now playing with a stray fry, dragging it in circles through the last of his ketchup. The boy was happy, unbothered, but Arnold's focus remained divided. Something here was wrong, something deeper than just one bad employee, and if he was going to do something about it, he needed to know just how far this went. This wasn't a single incident. This was culture. And culture didn't change with warnings. It changed when people were no longer afraid to speak. But first, they needed to know someone was listening. Arnold had always believed in leading from within. Today, that belief was being tested, and he intended to pass. Quietly, patiently, relentlessly. Arnold waited until the lunch rush began to taper off before making his move. The of noise in the dining area had softened, replaced by the low clinks of trays being cleared, and the quiet murmur of conversations from scattered tables. He had watched enough by now to feel certain of a few things. The fear that hung over the employees wasn't imagined. Simon's control wasn't incidental, and whatever was happening behind the counter had been going on for a while. But watching could only take him so far. If he wanted to understand how deep the rot went, he needed to hear from someone who'd lived through it. Someone who had seen the patterns and learned how to survive them. That person he had already decided was the man working the back line. Caleb. Caleb Malcolm was not young, nor was he loud. He moved with the steady rhythm of someone who had done this job long enough to know every motion by instinct, but not so long that he moved carelessly. Tall and broad-shouldered, he wore his Redgate uniform like it was armor clean, but in worn sleeves rolled up just above the elbow apron, neatly tied but faded from years of use. His expression was unreadable, not unfriendly, but not inviting either. He focused on the grill, on timing, on plating. When other employees stumbled or hesitated, Caleb never intervened unless absolutely necessary. He seemed to live by one rule: keep your head down, do your work, stay out of the line of fire. Arnold watched him for several minutes, noting how the other staff interacted with him. They respected him. That much was clear. Some looked to him silently when they were uncertain, and while Caleb didn't say much, his presence steadied the rhythm in the kitchen. Simon hadn't addressed him once during the entire time Arnold had been observing. That, too, told him something. Either Simon knew better than to push Caleb, or he considered him a non-threat, someone who wouldn't get involved. Arnold couldn't be sure which it was, but either way, Caleb was the only person in that kitchen who didn't look afraid. That made him valuable. He waited until Caleb stepped out briefly to the prep station, near the front, a rag in one hand, checking supplies, or maybe just resetting the order of things. It was the first moment Arnold had seen him outside the tight perimeter of the down and back line. He stood and made his way over, casually, like a customer stretching his legs. Nothing suspicious. He didn't want to startle the man. He just wanted to open a door. Food looked solid back there, Arnold said evenly, nodding toward the kitchen. His tone was casual, respectful, the kind used between two people who understood the unspoken rules of hard work. Caleb looked up, his eyes meeting Arnold's for only a second, before returning to the small stack of to-go lids he was adjusting. "Thanks," he replied. His voice was low, steady, not defensive, but not warm either, just enough to acknowledge the compliment and move on. Arnold didn't push. He stood beside him a moment longer, eyes scanning the prep area, then the line at the register. "You've been here long." Caleb paused slightly, the motion of his hand slowing, then said, "Long enough." Arnold let that hang for a second. It shows. Place moves smoother when someone like you is on the line. That got a flicker of reaction. A quick glance, then a brief nod, but no further comment. Caleb returned to wiping the counter. His shoulders were loose, but Arnold sensed the guard behind them. This was a man who had learned to choose his words carefully, not out of fear, but out of experience. "Seems like a busy day," Arnold continued, still watching the counter, "but something about the SIF. Energy here feels different, like people are watching their backs." Caleb didn't look up. He wiped in one slow circular motion, then said, "People watch what they need to watch." It wasn't a dismissal. It was a test, a way to see how far Arnold would go without overstepping. Arnold took a breath. "I've worked in restaurants, owned a few, too. Seen good teams, bad ones, and the ones where folks keep their heads down, hoping not to get called out. This feels like that last one." Caleb's hand stopped. He set the rag down slowly, then turned slightly to face Arnold, his expression still unreadable. "You a secret shopper or something?" Arnold smiled just a little. "No, just a customer who pays attention." Caleb stared at him for a second, long enough to weigh something in his mind, then said, "Well, That makes you one of the rare ones." There was no sarcasm in his voice, just quiet truth. Arnold leaned slightly on the counter, keeping his plate posture relaxed. "You like working here?" Caleb gave a short breath, half chuckle, half sigh. "I like cooking. I like not worrying about bills, but working here." He shook his head once. "That's something else." Arnold nodded slowly. "What makes it hard?" Caleb hesitated. He looked over and his shoulder toward the back, checking, without seeming to check if Simon was in sight. Then he lowered his voice. "Management's particular. That a polite way of saying hostile." Caleb didn't answer immediately. He picked up the rag again, folded it, then placed it neatly on the side of the counter. "Let's just say the ones who ask too many questions don't last long. Doesn't matter how good they are. If they push back, they get pushed out." Arnold narrowed his eyes. "Pushed out how hours get cut. Suddenly, they're not on the schedule next week. They ask why they get written up for things that never happened after a pride body. While they get tired of fighting and dotty frown, they leave. Makes it look like a turnover problem, but it's not." Arnold let that settle for a moment. It matched what he had seen, what he had suspected. He wasn't hearing anything dramatic. No smoking gun. But what Caleb was describing was worse in some ways. It was quiet, systemic, calculated, and hard to prove. "You ever see anyone report it?" Arnold asked. Caleb raised an eyebrow. "To who?" "Corporate." Another short laugh, this one with less humor. "Folks have tried. Some even had paperwork. Nothing ever came of it. Why do you think that is?" Caleb looked him square in the eye for the first time. "Because the people above the problem are either ignoring it or they are the problem." Arnold exhaled slowly. There it was. Not shouted, not dramatized. Just said plainly by someone who had been around long enough to know where the cracks ran in the foundation. "You ever think about leaving?" Caleb shrugged. "All the time. But I got a mortgage, 2 kids, and this job pays steady." "Doesn't mean I like it. Doesn't mean I respect it. Just means I can't afford to lose it." Arnold respected that honesty more than anything else he'd heard all day. He straightened up, tapped a finger slightly on the counter, then said, "Thanks for the honesty." Caleb gave a short nod, then picked up the rag again. "Be careful who you talk to. Some ears in here don't miss much." Arnold didn't need to ask who he meant. "I'll keep that in mind." As he walked back to the booth, Arnold felt the pieces shifting in his mind. Caleb hadn't told him everything, but he'd told him enough to know that Vera wasn't the only one living under pressure. Enough to confirm that Simon's grip extended far beyond petty threats, and most importantly, enough to, "I believe that this wasn't just a rogue manager abusing his staff. It was a system designed to keep people scared, quiet, and replaceable." He slid back into the booth across from Mason, who is now playing a game on Arnold's phone. The boy didn't look up. Arnold glanced toward the kitchen one more time. He had someone on the inside now, not an ally, not yet, but someone who saw what he saw. That was the start of something, and he wasn't planning to let it go. Arnold waited until the timing felt right. He had spent enough of the afternoon watching, listening, and threading the line between concern and intervention. The lunch rush had thinned to a manageable flow. Simon had vanished into his office, and the staff seemed to breathe just a little easier. It wasn't relief exactly, more like the small pocket of space people used to recover. Before the pressure returned, Arnold had spotted Vera near the soda station, restocking napkins and plastic lids, her hands moving quickly, but with the kind of mechanical rhythm that came from doing something too many times with too little peace of mind. No one else was around, and the customers in the lobby just weren't paying attention. If there was a moment to try, this was it. He approached slowly, careful not to come in too fast or too direct. She didn't look up at first, her focus trained on folding a stack of paper towels tighter into the holder. Arnold kept his tone light, long shift. Vera glanced up just for a second, then gave a polite nod, without smiling. Just another Saturday. Arnold leaned slightly on the edge of the counter. Not too close, just enough to seem at ease. "Used to work weekends like this a long time ago," he said. "Sometimes feels like everyone else in The world gets a day off except the people making sure they get fed. That earned a faint sound from her. Not quite. A laugh, not a scoff either. Maybe a small exhale of recognition. Her eyes darted briefly toward the kitchen. Still, no sign of Simon. Her fingers moved faster. "This place always runs so tense," he asked, keeping his voice even. She paused, blinked once, then resumed, folding. "Depends who's on shift." Arnold nodded slowly. "I noticed earlier when you were at the register. Looked like your hands were shaking a bit." Vera didn't respond right away. She finished with the napkins, closed the dispenser, and stood up straighter. Her jaw flexed slightly before she answered. "It happens. Sometimes, especially if you're trying not to make a mistake." He let the silence settle for a few seconds. Not to make her uncomfortable, but to give the moment some space. She wasn't being rude. She was being careful. "You know," he said quietly, "I watched a guy take cash from the drawer earlier. Didn't log, and it didn't even check the receipt." Vera froze. Her face didn't change, but the body stopped moving like the words had momentarily short-circuited something. Arnold continued, "I've run enough stores to know what that looks like." She finally looked at him, really looked. Her eyes searched his face for a long second. Then she lowered her voice. "Why are you telling me this? Because I think you already know it's happening." Arnold said, "I think you've seen it, and I think maybe you tried to say something once." Vera leaned slightly back against the counter, arms crossed tightly, but not in defiance. More like someone holding themselves together. "Doesn't change anything," she said. "People have said stuff before. Nothing ever happens." "What kind of stuff?" She glanced around again, then back at him. Her voice dropped even lower. "Paychecks that come up short. Hours that disappear from the schedule after you clock out. If you ask about it, they blame the system. Say it's a glitch. But the same people keep getting hit. Oh, the ones who aren't close to him. Simon." She nodded once. Arnold felt a slow pulse behind his temples. He kept his voice calm. "How long has that been going on since I got here?" she said. "But other people said it started before me. And the people who said something." Vera looked away, then back. Her jaw tightened. "They got fewer hours. Then they got written up. Then they were gone." Arnold didn't move. He let the weight of her words sink in between them. "You ever file a complaint?" he asked once. She said anonymously. "Or I thought it was. A week later, I was off. The schedule for 4 days." Her voice cracked just slightly on that last word. She looked down at her hands. "I used to. I think I was just unlucky. Then I stopped, thinking that." Arnold felt something tighten in his chest. He knew that feeling, that shift from self-doubt to hard truth. The moment when you stop asking what you did wrong and start seeing what's really being done to you. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said. Vera gave him a long, tired look. "That doesn't matter here." Arnold wanted to tell her it did. He wanted to promise change, but she wasn't looking for a promise. She was watching to see if he understood what it cost just to speak like this. "If I wanted to help," he asked, carefully, "what would that look like today?" "You?" Vera shook her head slowly. I know. Nobody ever stays around long enough to ask that." Arnold nodded. "Well, maybe it's time someone did." Before either of them could say more, a sharp voice called from the back. "Vera, front line." She stiffened. Her eyes flicked toward the kitchen, then back to Arnold. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "If you're serious, don't say anything yet. Just watch. See what happens next." Then she turned, straightened her shoulders, and walked back toward the counter with the same careful precision as before. Her face unreadable again. But something had shifted. Not in her job, not in her role. In her eyes, she wasn't alone anymore. And Arnold had no intention of letting that change. Arnold sat alone at the small desk in his hotel room. The soft hum of the mini fridge and the distant murmur of traffic outside the den window, providing the only ambient noise. The glow from his laptop cast a pale light across his face, catching the tension around his eyes that hadn't eased since he left the restaurant hours earlier. Mason had long since fallen asleep, curled up with a blanket on the filled-in bed behind him, the innocence of childhood resting in stark contrast to the weight that pressed on Arnold's chest. He stared at the login page of Redgate's internal operations portal his fingers hovering over the keyboard. This wasn't how most CEOs spent their Saturday nights, but Arnold didn't care. He wasn't here to delegate. He was here to know. Once logged in, the interface greeted him with familiar tabs: sales, reports, payroll, inventory usage, scheduling. He didn't need a tutorial. He had built this system, not the code, but the structure. How data flowed, how anomalies could be tracked, how truth could be uncovered if you knew where to be. Look, he started with the Charlotte location, the same store where Simon was, still working unchecked. Opening the sales reports from the past 6 months, he noted immediately that the total revenue for that branch consistently fell 15 to 20% below stores of similar size, and traffic. That by itself wasn't enough. Raise flags. There could be a dozen local factors, but when paired with the inventory usage logs, the numbers stopped making sense. The quantities of beef buns, fries, and condiments used matched the average for better performing stores, meaning food was moving. It was being cooked, served, and consumed. But the money, it wasn't being recorded. Arnold clicked over to the cash handling reports. Most stores showed digital transactions making up roughly 70% of daily sales, with cash filling the rest. But in Charlotte, cash accounted for nearly half of the transactions. Yet, even with higher cash sales, the end-of-day reconciliations reported no significant discrepancies. That was suspicious, especially for a bad location where he had personally witnessed Simon pocketing bills without a single keystroke. He moved on to payroll records. This was where things tightened. Employee clock-ins and clock-outs were time-stamped automatically, and in theory, those hours fed directly into the weekly payroll. But in Charlotte, several employees, Vera among them, had a proppage, consistent pattern. They clocked in for full shifts, but their paid hours were trimmed by small manual adjustments. An intake hour here, 90 minutes there. Not enough to spark outrage individually, but collectively across weeks, it became theft. Arnold pulled Vera's time log side by side with her pay-ubs. He traced the discrepancies, saw how the system listed her scheduled shift as 7 hours. Her clock-in matched that exactly, but the paid line showed 5 hours and 45 minutes. Every week, the same story. And it wasn't just her. 2 other names popped up repeatedly, both part-time. Staff who hadn't been present when he visited. Maybe they had already quit. Maybe they had been pushed out. A growing knot settled deeper into his cast-ins gut. He clicked through to the operations expense logs. Another red flag, a category labeled operational adjustments. On paper, it looked harmless. An umbrella entry for minor expenditures not accounted for elsewhere. But here, it was being used far too frequently. One entry cited equipment recalibration. Another, unexpected loss. Another, simply adjustment. None had documentation, no invoice, no manager notes, and all had been approved by Simon. Arnold sat back, exhaled through his nose, then leaned in. Again, he sorted the adjustment entries by date and cross-referenced them with Simon's schedule. Every time Simon managed a closing shift, an adjustment appeared, some as small as $30, others over $200. Always vague, always cash-based. It was systematic, not sloppy, not impulsive. It was structured, deliberate, and buried just deep enough to pass unnoticed unless someone was looking for it. And now Arnold was looking. He closed the Charlotte tab and opened a second location, one in Raleigh. Simon had worked there 12 months earlier. The same signs appeared: lower than average revenue, high cash ratio, frequent operational adjustments, payroll edits, different names, same pattern. A third location in Greenville and told the same story. Simon had moved between them like a ghost, leaving a trail of paper-thin cover-ups that had gone unchecked. But what struck Arnold as hardest wasn't just Simon's behavior, it was that someone let it continue. Simon had been transferred 3 times in less than 2 years, each time under the pretense of team restructuring. That wasn't a red flag to the system, but to Arnold, it was a siren. He checked the dahlias or flepped digital sign-offs, each of Simon's promotions, each location reassignment, each approval of his payroll and expense Reports bore the same regional signature. Killian Vincent, the regional director, a man Arnold had known professionally for nearly a decade, not close, not particularly friendly, but competent, or so he thought. Arnold leaned back in his chair, rubbed his temples, and stared at the screen. The silence in the room now felt louder, thick, with the knowledge that what he had feared was true. This wasn't an isolated store problem. It was systemic, coordinated, protected. He opened his Fent contacts and scrolled until he found the plus, a name he needed. Alfred Liu, Chief Financial Officer. If there was anyone else inside corporate who would follow the numbers honestly, it was Alfred. He was meticulous, understated, and impossible to intimidate. Arnold tapped. I got a message. Need your eyes on some data. Pattern across multiple stores. Payroll and expense manipulation linked to Simon Aubrey. All routes trace back to Killian. I'll send files shortly. He paused, reread the message, then hit send. A moment later, he began compiling the documents. Screenshot, CSV exports, summary notes. He created a folder, encrypted it, and labeled it Redgate, internal level 1 review. His fingers hovered over the trackpad. He looked once more at Vera's time log, at the column that read adjusted hours, at the way her paycheck had been sliced cleanly and quietly. She had said nobody ever stays around long enough to ask. Well, he was still here, and now he wasn't just asking, he was going to act. Arnold returned to the Charlotte store. The man after likened him in following day just before the afternoon rush. He walked in not as a customer, not as a curious bystander, but as the man whose name sat above the corporate charter, a founder reclaiming the values his brand was built on. The moment he stepped through the door, employees glanced up with the same guarded expressions he'd seen before. Some recognized him from the day prior, others didn't. But it didn't matter. He wasn't here to hide. He was here to speak. Simon was standing near the back line, reviewing what looked like a stack of inventory notes. He looked up, puzzled at first, then offered a tight smile that didn't touch his eyes. Mr. Hector, he said, too loud, too quickly. Didn't expect to see you back so soon. We keeping up with your expectations. Arnold didn't return the smile. Instead, he moved to the center of the dining area and clapped his hands twice firmly, not in anger, but to cut through the soft buzz of customer chatter and kitchen noise. Employees paused, heads turned. Everyone, Arnold said, his voice clear but steady. I need you to come out. Here for a moment, please, all of you. There was hesitation. Staff looked to one another. Some glanced toward Simon, unsure of how to respond. Simon's expression shifted, his jaw tightening. What's going on? He asked, walking forward, trying to take back control of the space. Arnold met his eyes directly. It concerns you. That's why I need everyone else present. Simon laughed, once hollow. Is this a corporate thing? Because I haven't gotten any memos. Arnold turned his head slightly. It's not a memo, it's accountability. Employees began to step out one by one. Vera came from behind the counter, her expression unreadable but alert. Caleb stood in the doorway from the kitchen, arms folded, eyes locked on Simon. A few part-timers hovered near the drink station, cautious but curious. No one, it spoke. Arnold held up a stack of printed backed reports in one hand. His voice remained calm, but there was no mistaking the firmness behind every word. For the past 6 months, he began, this location has reported below average revenue despite consistent product usage. The numbers don't align. You've been using just as much beef, just as many buns, just as many bags of fries, but somehow we're bringing in far less cash. Simon raised a brow. Maybe our customers just aren't spending as much. Arnold ignored the claving deflection. I cross-checked cash register logs with inventory. On days you're here, the percentage of cash transactions goes up, but recorded sales don't reflect that. I also found regular operational adjustments all signed under your name, each one conveniently following your closing shifts. Simon shifted his weight, trying to maintain composure. You think I'm stealing? I think you're exploiting a system you thought no one would question. Arnold flipped to the next page. Payroll records. Employees clock in for full shifts. The system logs their time, but when checks are issued, hours are missing. Not always, just enough to stay quiet and always to the same people. Vera inhaled sharply. The room grew still. Arnold looked at the staff directly. You've had your hours cut without explanation. You've seen your pay come up short, and when you asked, you were told it was a glitch. But it wasn't a glitch. It was deliberate. It was theft. Simon snapped. This is absurd. They know how hard it is to run a store like this. Mistakes happen. Arnold turned to him. Yes, they do. But when they only happen to the same people, and they always benefit the same person, that's not a mistake. That's a pattern. He set the papers down on a nearby table. I gave you authority to lead, not to intimidate, not to steal, not to teach people fear. You used your position to manipulate numbers and silence voices. Simon stepped forward, his tone sharpening. You think these kids are going to back you up? You think they care? They need this job more than they need justice. They always have. There was a pause. Then Vera spoke. Not anymore. Her voice was clear, but it shook slightly with the weight of everything she had held in. She stepped forward, standing beside Arnold. He's right. My hours were changed. I asked about it. I was told it was an error. It kept happening. When I reported it, I was taken off the schedule. Simon's face twisted. You have no idea what it takes to run this place. Another voice joined. Caleb, no, but we know what it feels like to be run over. Then another, younger employee from the kitchen. I thought I was the only one. The silence broke. Others nodded. Some looked at their feet, ashamed they hadn't spoken sooner. But the current had shifted. The fear had cracked. Arnold turned back to Simon. Effective immediately. You are relieved of your position. You will not return to this location. Your access to the system is revoked. Simon didn't move at first. Then his face flushed red. He took a step forward, chest puffed. I can't just walk in here and do this. I built this team. Arnold stood firm. No, you broke it. And now it's time to rebuild. Simon looked around. For the first time, no one looked back with fear. No one stood beside him. He grabbed his jacket from the back office, shoved past the door, and walked out. The door swung shut behind him with a soft final thud. No one spoke for several seconds. Then someone exhaled. Then another. A tension older than any. One shift began to dissolve. Arnold turned to the group. This is not the end of anything. It's the beginning. There will be an interim manager, but more importantly, there will be a system intentionate place to make sure this never happens again. If you've got something to say, you'll be heard. If something is wrong, it will be fixed. You deserve more than silence. Vera stood quietly. Her eyes, they weren't wet, but they shimmered. Thank you, she said. Not loudly. Not to everyone, just to him. Arnold gave a pracis, small nod. No, thank you for not giving up. Arnold woke up early the next morning to a phone buzzing nonstop against the nightstand. The sky outside was still dim, the pale blue of pre-dawn filtering in through the curtains. His phone lit up with notifications, emails, text messages, missed calls. At first, he assumed it might be his operations team checking in or Alfred Liu following up on the report package he had sent the night before. But as he unlocked the screen, he saw the first headline staring back at him in bold, sharp letters. Redgate Shakeup CEO removes veteran manager amid allegations. He blinked. Another alert followed, then another. Different headlines, different outlets, but all circling the same story. Inside the controversy at Redgate Grill, one read, sources claim retaliation against employees. Anonymous. Staffer CEO used intimidation to force loyalty. It didn't take long for Arnold to realize what had happened. Someone had gotten ahead of him. Not just a leak, but a coordinated smear campaign, complete with fabricated quotes and selectively leaked documents that painted the events in Charlotte as something personal, vindictive, and unstable. Arnold sat up slowly, his shoulders heavy with the kind of anger that didn't yell, It settled deep and cold. He scrolled through the articles, scanning for the fingerprints behind the death. Push. Several quotes were credited to internal sources with no names. One article claimed Simon had been removed for questioning corporate ethics. Another said Vera had been promoted in exchange for silence. He knew immediately what this was, not just damage control. This was a counterattack. He dialed Alfred Liu without hesitation. The phone rang twice. "I figured you'd be calling too," Alfred said as he answered, voice alert. "Despite the hour, you seeing this every outlet? Looks like someone dumped a packet last night. Coordinated, probably. And media lists that were preloaded and ready." Arnold stood pacing slowly. "Do we know where it came from?" "Not officially, but I did some digging after we hung up last night." "You were right. All the regional approvals on Simon's payroll, adjustments, the expense logs, the transfers, they all trace back to one person, Killian Vincent." Arnold stopped, pacing. He signed off on everything. "Everything," Alfred confirmed. "And there's more. A whistleblower file was opened last year at another location under Killian's territory. Disappeared from the records 3 weeks later. No closure, no follow-up." Arnold closed his eyes for a second, then asked, "How high does this go?" "That depends," Alfred said. "Do you want a guess or the truth? Because if you want the truth, we're going to need more than reports. We need testimony, patterns, a direct trail." Arnold exhaled slowly. "Let's get it." As the morning progressed, the fine media pressure intensified. Social media lit up with speculation. Hashtags began trending. Most customers didn't know Arnold personally, and a few loud voices, likely planted, began questioning his leadership, his motives. Some even accused him of targeting Simon for personal reasons. The narrative was already being rewritten, and if he didn't act fast, the truth would be buried under spin. He opened his laptop and began calling former employees. Names Vera had mentioned. Names Caleb, and had muttered under his breath. He didn't call to pry or interrogate. He asked them to talk to be heard. One of them was Daniel, a former assistant manager from the Greenville location. He agreed to meet. They met that afternoon at a quiet diner outside city limits. Daniel was in his early 30s, worn down, but sharp. He still carried the weight of something unresolved. "You were with the Greenville store when Simon transferred in?" Arnold asked. Daniel nodded. "Things changed real fast after that. I went from full-time to 20 hours a week in less than a month. I asked questions. I got written up twice. False reasons. He was gone by the end of the quarter. Did you file a complaint?" "Yeah," Daniel said. "To HR. I never even got a confirmation. And when I called to follow up, they said there was no record. Said maybe I filed it wrong." Arnold leaned back. "Did Killian ever contact you directly?" Daniel looked up surprised. "Yeah, he called once. Said I was causing disruption, that I should think about how hard it is to keep stores running smoothly. Said sometimes people get weeded out for the good of the team." Arnold nodded grimly. That was Killian, polished on the outside, corrosive underneath. Later that evening, Arnold received an email. The sender, Killian Vincent. The subject, "Let's keep this constructive." He opened it. The tone was civil measured, but the subtext was clear. "Arnold, we understand your recent concerns and appreciate your passion for integrity. However, as we work through this transition, we ask that all regional matters be addressed through proper channels. Unilateral decisions may cause disruption at a time when unity is needed. Let's avoid unnecessary escalation. I am happy to meet if you wish to align perspectives respectfully. Killian Vincent." Arnold stared at the multi-screen, letting the words settle. There was no direct threat, no overt defiance, but the message was crystal clear. Back off, play along, or face the consequences. He replied with a single sentence, "We'll be aligning a lot sooner than you think." The battle had just changed shape, and Arnold was done playing defense. Arnold sat in the quiet of his office later that night, the walls lined with company photos and awards that once meant pride, but now only reminded him how far the rot had reached beneath the surface. His laptop was open again, the glow lighting his face with the same weary focus he'd carried for days. There were no new articles for the moment, no more headlines, but the silence didn't bring peace. It was just the pause before the next move. He needed to know who was helping Killian operate unchecked for so long, who had protected him from scrutiny, buried complaints, and promoted him, despite patterns of misconduct that no responsible leader could overlook. If Simon was the face of the problem, Killian was the system. But systems didn't protect themselves. Someone higher had kept the doors open. He called Alfred. "We need to go deeper," Arnold said the moment Alfred picked up. Alfred didn't hesitate. "I started pulling older files already. I didn't want to say anything until I could confirm it, but I think we have a pattern going back further than you thought." Arnold leaned forward, tension in his spine. "How far?" "At least 4 years," Alfred said. "I pulled records on every location Killian Vincent has overseen since he came on board. There's a good pattern of managers being replaced after unexplained write-ups, shifts in store, performance that don't make sense, payroll inconsistencies. It's not always obvious, but the flags are there. And I found something else." Arnold braced. "What?" "He came from another chain before. Redgate," Alfred explained. "Quick serve. Big regional franchise on the West Coast. Left under vague circumstances. Officially, it was labeled as a mutual departure, but there was a financial audit done just months before he exited. The final report disappeared from their blood system before it went public." Arnold exhaled through his nose. That sounded familiar. "Someone buried it." "Likely," Alfred said. "And when I cross-referenced who approved Killian's hiring at Mans Redgate, it wasn't HR or regional. It was escalated directly to board review. And guess whose name is on the sign-off?" Arnold didn't speak. He waited. "James Prescott." The name didn't come as a shock. It came like a lock clicking into the 2% place. James Prescott had served on Redgate's board of directors for more than a decade, always present at strategic retreats, always advocating for leaner operations, faster turnover, and managerial efficiency. He spoke in clean language, the kind that sounded smart in meetings, but meant nothing to the people who worked 16-hour shifts under fluorescent lights. Arnold had never trusted him, but he had never had a reason to investigate until now. Arnold stood up and began to pace, one hand on his hip, the other pressed against his forehead. He brought Killian. He vouched for him. "Not just that," Alfred said. He shielded him. "I checked internal HR routing. Every complaint submitted about Killian from the past 3 years was forwarded to corporate, legal, and every one of those was marked resolved with no follow-up." Arnold stopped moving, his jaw set. "We need statements," he said. "Not just reports, people, names, testimony." "Already working on it," Alfred replied. "I contacted a former district finance officer, Cassandra Reyes. She worked under Killian for 8 months, left without warning. She was the one who flagged inconsistencies in the Charlotte and Greenville branches, but got sidelined. She's willing to talk." Arnold sat back down. "Get her in. And Daniel, anyone else you can find who was pushed us out after calling him out." The next day, Cassandra joined Arnold and Alfred in a quiet meeting room away from headquarters. She was young, but carried herself with the poise of someone who had learned hard lessons early. Her tone was calm, but beneath her words was the unmistakable sting of betrayal. "I reported the numbers because they didn't make sense," she said. "The system showed manual adjustments that didn't match actual inventory or sales flow. When I brought it up, Killian said it was probably a data migration error, but I tracked it back manually. It was intentional." "And what happened after you reported it?" Arnold asked. Cassandra gave a small, bitter smile. "I was reassigned to project support within a week. No clear tasks, no access to store financials. A month later, I was offered a severance package to resign." Arnold and Alfred exchanged a look. Alfred asked, "Do you have anything from then notes emails?" She nodded. "I downloaded my final month's ledger reports before my access was revoked. I knew something was wrong." She pulled out a USB drive and slid it across the table. Arnold didn't rush. He reached for it slowly, nodding once. "Thank you. You're helping more people than you know." She sat back quiet, letting the weight lift from her shoulders, if only slightly. By the end of the day, Arnold and Alfred had outlined the beginning of a report that would force a formal board hearing. They had employee records, flagged reports supporting documentation from Cassandra, and financial summaries that showed manipulation across multiple branches. All roads led to Killian, and every approval, every promotion, every buried complaint pointed back to James Prescott. Arnold looked at the thick folder now forming on his desk. The anger hadn't dulled, but it had focused. The system he built had been used against its own people, and the men responsible had been operating above the consequence for far too long. That was about to change. He turned to Alfred. "You think they'll try to stop us?" Alfred didn't hesitate. "Of course they will." Arnold nodded. "Then let's make sure they can't." The boardroom at Redgate and headquarters was quiet when Arnold walked in, but the silence wasn't stillness. It was calculation. The room was sleek, all glass walls and polished wood, with a long table at the center that had hosted more decisions than anyone could count. Most of the board members were already seated, exchanging cautious glances or scrolling through their tablets, as if what they were about here could be deflected by spreadsheets. Arnold had been in this room countless times, but never with this kind of weight on his shoulders. Today, it wasn't about growth, projections, or brand expansions. It was about rot, and whether this board had the courage to admit it had allowed that rot to spread. James Prescott sat near the head of the table, dressed in his usual tailored navy suit, his expression unreadable, calm, but not warm. He looked up as Arnold entered, offered a polite nod, and said, "Arnold, I'm glad you could join us. We've all been eager to hear your concerns." Arnold met in his gaze and didn't return the smile. "Let's get started." Selena Mava, the longest tenure board member and co-founder of Redgate, cleared her throat. "We're convened here because of irregularities brought to our attention by Mr. Hector," she said. "Oh, we'll hear the findings in full before discussion." Arnold didn't waste time. He walked to the front of the room, opened his laptop, and projected a set of documents onto the wall screen. "Over the past several months, we've seen significant financial manipulation across multiple stores in our southeastern region," he began. "Cash flow not matching product movement, payroll deductions not matching, logged hours in expense entries signed off without supporting documentation." Some members shifted in their seats. James sat motionless. Arnold continued, "The common thread in every case is Regional Director Killian Vincent. Each of these locations was under his oversight. Each complaint was either dismissed or buried." He clicked to the next slide, showing the signature trail. "And each of these approvals, manager transfers, budget increases erased. Disciplinary actions bears the direct authorization of Mr. Prescott." James leaned forward, slightly hands folded. "With respect, Arnold, you're making a lot of assumptions from data that can be interpreted many ways. Operational flexibility is part of regional management. You know that." Arnold nodded, "which is why I brought testimony." He stepped aside as a video played. First, Cassandra Reyes, her voice steady but tight, explained how she flagged the fraud and was pushed into silence. Then, Daniel's statement, short and raw, his hours cut, his record tarnished, his job gone. Then came Alfred breaking down the pattern, the manipulation of payroll data, the false expense classifications. When the video ended, the room was silent again, but now it was uneasy. James smiled tightly. "We appreciate their perspectives, but again, these are emotional testimonies, not official audits. Mistakes happen, misunderstandings, overreactions. Surely, we don't intend to dismantle years of leadership because a few former employees are unhappy with their exits." Arnold turned to face the room. "This isn't about a few unhappy employees. This is about a culture of suppression, a system that punished integrity. You heard it in their words. You can see it in the numbers." He stepped forward, voice rising just slightly. "And when those concerns reached corporate, when they should have been reviewed, investigated, they died on James Prescott's desk." James's mouth twitched. He glanced around the table. "That's a serious accusation." It's backed by your own email, Arnold said, bringing up the next slide. Highlighted text. James to Killian. Keep it internal. Keep him in a place. Let the numbers catch up later. James straightened, but the tightness in his posture betrayed him. That was about cost alignment, not concealment. Selena finally spoke, her voice quiet but unmistakably firm. It doesn't read that way. And if these reports are accurate, it suggests a breach not only of ethical policy but fiduciary responsibility. Another board member, Margaret Lynn, nodded slowly. We're talking about coordinated wage suppression and unreported cash movement that crosses into liability. James sat back, his jaw working, but no words came. Arnold looked around the table, letting the moment settle. We cannot preach integrity to our customers, our investors, our people, and then protect the very behavior we claim to reject. If we ignore this, we become it. Selena stood. I move for a vote. Effective. Immediately, I propose that Killian, Vincent, and James Prescott be suspended from all duties pending full internal and legal review. We will appoint an independent auditor, and any attempt to influence that process will result in immediate dismissal. No one objected. The vote passed without resistance. James didn't speak. He simply gathered his folder, stood, and left the room without looking back. The sound of the door closing behind him was softer than expected, but it echoed all the same. When it was done, Arnold sat down, slowly. The room was quiet again, but this time it felt earned. Selena looked at him and gave a small nod. It took guts to bring this forward, she said. Not many would have. Arnold met her eyes. Too many people gave up thinking. No one ever would. That ends today. The following week moved at a different type rhythm, not slower, but steadier. As the noise of the scandal died down, a deeper process began, one that didn't make headlines or stir up hashtags. It was the work of rebuilding from within. With James Prescott and Killian Vincent officially suspended and internal audits underway, Arnold turned his attention to what mattered most, the people inside. Redgate, the ones who had endured, adapted, and survived despite a system built to break them. If justice was step 1, trust had to be step 2. He returned to the Charlotte store on a quiet Tuesday morning. No announcements, no cameras, just a plain collared shirt, slacks, and a clipboard. He wanted to see with his own eyes, not numbers, not reports, but people. The first thing he noticed was the air. It didn't carry that tight, invisible tension anymore. Employees moved more naturally. The nervous glances were gone, and behind the register stood Vera. She didn't see of him at first. She was helping a customer, smiling, not forced, not performative, but calm present. When she looked up and spotted him, her posture stiffened for half a second, then softened. Back already? She asked, wiping her hands on a towel. Arnold stepped forward, not checking up, just here to listen. Vera nodded, then glanced over her shoulder. We're down a shift lead. I've been covering double time, but it's different now. No one's yelling. No one's watching us just to wait for a mistake. Arnold lowered his voice. You've held this place together when no one else did. I want to make that official, assistant manager, and not just by title. Full pay, full authority. Vera blinked. You're serious. Dead serious, Arnold said. And I want for you to help shape how we train new staff. Moving forward, you've seen the worst. That makes you the best person to build something better. She didn't smile. Not right away. But her eyes said everything. And when she finally nodded, it wasn't small. It was full. In the back, Arnold found Caleb inspecting the fryer. The same quiet focus. The same strong hands. When Arnold called his fared name, Caleb straightened slowly. Eyes sharp. Didn't think I'd see you in the fight. Kitchen, Caleb said. Arnold leaned against the doorway. Didn't think I'd get to offer you a bigger kitchen. Caleb raised an eyebrow. We're redesigning training across the region, Arnold continued. We need oversight at multiple stores. Someone who understands how things really work. Someone who isn't afraid to speak up, but knows how to listen too. Caleb set down the tray in his hand, then crossed his arms. You're offering me a tenfold corporate gig. I'm offering you influence, Still hands-on, still with a team, but with a voice in the meetings that shape policy. You up for that? Caleb looked past him for a moment, then back. Yeah, I think I am. Arnold spent the rest of the day not in meetings, but inside conversations. He talked to part-timers, some barely 18, who had once been scared to ask for water breaks. He asked about what they needed, what they'd change, and more. Often than not, just listened. Most didn't want dramatic overhauls. They wanted fairness, predictability, respect. 2 days later, Arnold stood in front of regional staff at a town hall, held in the back of the training center. No suits, no stage, just rows of chairs, a projector, and an open mic. He didn't deliver a speech. He started with a question. What would make you proud to be round it? Work here? At first, silence. Then slowly, hands raised, voices rose. They talked about fair scheduling, about consistent feedback, about managers who knew their names. And for the first time in a long time, people didn't whisper when they spoke. That night, Arnold met again with Selena Mava. She had seen his proposal for a new employee oversight program, a 3-tier system for anonymous reporting, local mediation, and independent review. You really believe they'll use this? She asked. Arnold didn't hesitate. They will if they believe. We'll listen. Selena leaned back. You've changed, Arnold. No, he said quietly. I just finally listened to the people who'd been shouting all along. Across the following month, changes began to take root. Stores introduced mandatory ethics workshops, not with lectures, but real stories told by employees who had lived through the culture of silence. Vera stood in front of trainees and told them what it felt. I like to work a shift, wondering if your hours would disappear. Caleb walked new hires through real-time decision-making, when to speak, how to document where to go when something felt off. These weren't policies. They were truths. Customers noticed too. Not immediately, but gradually smiles became real. Service became steadier, and word began to spread that Redgate had turned a corner, not with marketing, but with integrity. Arnold returned to the Reddit Charlotte store once more weeks later. Mason was with him this time, now old, enough to ask questions and understand some answers. Are they nicer now? Mason asked as they walked in. Arnold looked around. Vera behind the counter, Caleb in the back, new faces moving with purpose. They're not just nicer, Arnold said. They're respected. They ordered lunch and sat by the window. And for the first time in a long time, Arnold didn't need to watch the staff to see what was broken. He saw what was working. He saw the beginning of something whole. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.